Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to talk about the books that I read during the month of January. So I read 14 books in total, which is fairly good, I would say. That's like above average for what I need for the month in order to meet my like Goodreads goal. I want to read like 125 this year, so like a little over 12 is what I need per month. 14 is pretty good. So some interesting facts about this month was that it looks like I didn't read a single book written by a man. Not surprising considering romance has been a pretty big part of my reading for the last couple of months. A majority of these books also have a fantastical sci-fi speculative element. A lot more contemporary romance than what I would expect in a like month. I usually read maybe like one or two. I have 4 contemporary romances this month. Also an interesting fact, didn't read a single physical book. Everything was ebook or audiobook. None of these books I owned. It was actually split down the middle. 7 of these books were from Kindle Unlimited and 7 of these books from my library. So the total pages read this month was 4,294 pages, with the average book length being like 307 pages, give or take. Before I continue, I did actually do a reading vlog talking about a good chunk of these books. In that vlog, I read monster romances because they seem to be really popular on TikTok and I wanted to like try them out. I had a good time, so I won't talk about those books in great detail. You can go watch that vlog. I will link it somewhere in this video or down below. But yeah, I read 5 books for that video. 2 of the highest rated books of this month were actually in that video. First being A Lady of Rooksgrave Manor by Kathryn Moon. I gave that 4.5 stars. That's a reverse harem monster romance, also historical. I'm not sure what era it takes place in, maybe the Victorian era. But in this book we follow a young woman who needs a job and she gets offered a position to essentially work at a brothel that services like monstrous men. And the other book that I gave a 4.5 was Morning Glory Milking Farm by C.M. Nacosta. This is about a young woman who needs a job. I don't know why it's a theme, but this young woman needs a job and she finds a position at a pharmaceutical company that's called a milking technician, and she doesn't know what that is, but it's essentially what you would have to do is like manually stimulate minotaurs. Yes, premise sounds really ridiculous and like over the top, which it is, but the author does a really good job at like grounding these characters and the situations and the relationships in like reality. Like if there wasn't like minotaurs and fae and vampire walking around town, like this reads like very contemporary and I really enjoyed it. 4.5 stars. I had 2 books that were kind of like okay. Feed by Aveda Vice, I gave 3 stars. This is about a succubus who uses a like monster dating app called Monster in order to find a partner that she can feed off of because she's a succubus, but also to hook up with. It's like 62 pages long, very short. I thought it was okay. I would have continued on, but when I looked up this book, the first book was on Kindle Unlimited and the second one wasn't, and I wasn't like super in love with the first book to like justify getting the second one. But if you're like looking for something quick, again, 62 pages. The other book that I gave 3 stars to was Stalked by the Kraken by Lillian Lark. This was like a good 3 stars, like fun but like not super memorable like after you finish. In this book we follow a witch who is a matchmaker and a kraken becomes very enamored with her and romance. That's pretty much it, but it was completely fine. There's nothing wrong with it, just a fun casual read. And there's one book that I really didn't like, which was Matched to the Monster by Rena Marks. I gave this 2 stars. The plot, the story was a complete hot mess for me, but if you want my full thoughts on this book and like all these other books that I've talked about, please go watch that vlog. So that's that with those 5 books. Let's talk about like contemporary romance. I actually read 2 contemporary romance that were within the same series. I read Well Met and Well Played by Jen De Luca. This is part of that Ren Fair romance series that a lot of people really enjoy. I wanted to give it a shot. I really enjoyed the first book. I gave it 4 stars. In the first book we follow our main character. Her name escapes me, but she essentially goes to live with her older sister who's gotten into a car accident and she needs like physical assistance for some time. She doesn't really have like a sense of direction in life that I can get, but she does volunteer at this Renaissance festival and she meets a guy who like helps run this festival, this fair, and it's like a enemies to lovers, annoyances to lovers, like grumpy type love interest. I really enjoyed this. I wasn't super sold on the romance from the get-go. He was like really hard to like. At no point, or at least early on into the book, I was like, why am I supposed to like love this love interest? But it did get better, like romance wise. I did really like the like Renaissance fair element of this story. I'm personally not super familiar with this type of thing. It's not really popular where I'm from, but I really enjoyed reading it. Yeah, I think the author really tied it well in with like the story overall, so I gave it 4 stars. The second book in the series, Well Played, I had a little bit of issues, like a little bit more issues as far as the romance goes. Catfishing is a strong like part of the story, so if you're uncomfortable with like catfishing, or that's like not your thing, this might not be for you. But without spoilers, the person who was catfishing probably should have apologized more. I feel like we kind of rushed over it a little too quickly. I hope that's not a huge spoiler. It might make or break someone's reading experience. It almost broke the story for me, but the author's strength really lies in making this setting with the Renaissance fair and all that kind of stuff like really like heartwarming, and like it's like a really cute story. If it wasn't for like the Renaissance fair like vibes and setting and all that kind of stuff, I probably might have rated this lower. I still gave it like a 3.5 star. It's a good story. Just had some issues with the romance. But since we're talking about contemporary romance, I might as well get like the other 2 out of the way. I read Battle Royale by Lucy Parker. I was really excited for this one because the elements, like the story themes that I saw, looked really interesting to me. In this book, we follow a character who was essentially part of like the equivalent of like the Great British Baking Show, that baking show that's like really popular. She obviously doesn't win. This is all very early on in the story, but she does become popular like as a contestant, like a reality TV show character. When she goes on to have her own career, she's like very well known for having like very like fun, over the top, glitter, color, sparkly like desserts, and she has her own business. And then there is a love interest who was the judge on her show. They were never romantic while they were working on the show initially, but he's more known for being like a Simon Cowell type, like very harsh and like not very warm. And he also has his own baking company that's a little more like Martha Stewart-esque, if you will, like very prim proper, that kind of thing. So I guess it's like very much like sunshine grumpy type of vibes here. I really wanted to like this, but a lot of times this didn't really feel like a romance. We pretty much skipped over like the whole like pining, like having a crush on the person. It felt like they didn't like each other, and all of a sudden they were like sleeping together. I got no like yearning, no angst. It kind of skipped over that part of the romance, which is like my favorite, where they like slowly start to realize they like each other, and it's like a will they, won't they. This author kind of skipped over that, unfortunately. There's also so many like storylines that kind of distracted from the romance. There's like a royal wedding storyline. There was like this like potential like thievery going on, and there was like family trauma that they have to deal with. Like there's a bunch of stuff, and I didn't get enough romance in this romance book, which sucked because I think it had the potential to be more. And the other contemporary romance that I have is kind of a disappointment. Not because it was bad, it was completely fine, but a lot of people really love this book, and I just gave it a 3-star, and that was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I've heard praise for this book like non-stop. It is so well loved within like contemporary romance circles. In this book, we follow Chloe Brown, who goes through this pretty like traumatic event that kind of helps her rethink her life. She used to be kind of like a homebody, very like reserved, and then after this event she kind of wants to get a life. Chloe Brown also has a chronic illness. I forget what it's called like off the top of my head. She's also a black woman, and she's also plus sized. Her love interest, Red, I've also heard is like this amazing love interest. I think the romance in general was just like okay, like it was fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but it didn't blow me away. I don't know if I'll read the next ones. Also, I listened to this on audiobook, which was like maybe that was a mistake and that affected my reading. This is like no shade, but it sounds like an older woman, like with a very like prim proper accent, and I don't know, that's not the voice I have in my head for Chloe Brown. Yeah, like the audiobook narrator is like not it. I quickly want to touch on Barbarian's Beloved by Ruby Dixon. This is like book number like 18 in the Ice Planet Barbarian series. Like if you were to get every single clip of me talking about each individual book, my reviews kind of sound very similar. I love this series, don't get me wrong, but like you kind of know what you're getting, which is completely fine. Some people like want to know what they're getting. In this book we follow a character named Adriana, who's been part of the series since the beginning, but we're barely getting her book, like her perspective, her particular romance. When we first meet her, she's like crying a lot. That's how she's described, the crier. Like, she's always crying when we first see her in book 1. The author has written her with like an anxiety, like panic disorder. She doesn't have her meds, so that's like a huge thing that she has to work through on this planet, where she doesn't have access to the healthcare that she needs. I will say that for Ruby Dixon, she does add in things that you typically wouldn't see addressed in these like very fun casual romp of like romance. These books aren't very long at all, so the fact that she's like integrating these themes so well in something that's so short, I think is something to like commend the author for. But also, like every other book, she finds a mate that makes her feel loved and gives her something to care for, something to enjoy while she's like on this planet. I feel like I talk about this series like in every like wrap up, because I try to like read one a month. But again, if you still don't know what Ice Planet Barbarians is, it's about a group of women that get abducted from Earth, and they crash land on a planet that's like an icy planet. They call it Not Hoth for a while, and a different group of aliens finds them, helps them like integrate into this planet. It's like not very hospitable for humans, but it leads to romance. So it's just like a fluffy, like fun sci-fi romance series. You pretty much know what you're getting with each installment, like happily ever after, that kind of thing. Really enjoy them, but it's kind of like a broken record at this point. So I read Everblaze by Shannon Messenger. This is the 3rd book in the Keepers of the Lost City series. This is a middle grade series that I'm slowly getting more and more invested in. In the series, we first follow Sophie, who is pretty strange. When we first meet her, she can like read minds. If I remember correctly, she's also very like gifted intelligence wise. She's like ahead a few grade levels when we first meet her. She kind of like sticks out from like her peers, and then she meets someone and they kind of whisk her away to this other world. She's told that she's not human, that she's actually a little bit different, or she's special. This series has a lot of themes and tropes that you might see in other like fantasy middle grade series, but I really enjoy it. It's a very fun like adventure story. The thing that I notice about reading Keeper of the Lost Cities is that I forget what happens. For some reason I can't retain like what is happening in each book like after I finish reading them, but like it all comes back the minute like I start the next one, which I don't know if it's because I read too much. There's like adventures that these characters go on. They're all fairly like lovable, and it is a middle grade, but it's still pretty like big epic scale. There's a lot of world building, a lot of like magic. They're really fun, but there hasn't been an installment in the series quite yet that completely like blows me away. The first one was pretty strong. Definitely within the moment they're very good, but like after I put them down, like after I finish, I kind of lose it a little bit. I'm not sure why. They are also pretty lengthy for middle grade books. This one was, I think, a 620 something pages. You could make the argument that maybe the author could cut down a little bit, but I mean, I enjoy them and I read through them pretty quickly because they are, you know, middle grade. So I have 3 more books to talk about, and let's talk about them in an order where progressively they get worse. So we have Visions in Silver by Anne Bishop. I believe this is the 3rd book in the other series. So this is like a rewritten like alternate history urban fantasy series. In this world, supernatural creatures have like always existed, and humans have always been the like prey, I guess. They were never like minority in terms of like numbers, since humans, you know, they have like babies more, but they are definitely not the highest in like the pecking order. And in this history, humans traveled across the Atlantic, kind of similarly in our history, except when humans landed in the Americas, they were also already supernatural beings already there. And in present day, humans live in like settlements, a few cities, but for the most part these settlements are pretty much like owned and ran and like supervised by these like supernatural creatures. In this series we follow a blood prophet, which is kind of in between like a human and like a supernatural type character. Our main character Meg needs to cut herself in order to have these prophecies. It's almost like an urge. So if you're uncomfortable with like blood cutting, self-mutilation, that type of thing, this might not be for you. It could be a little bit triggering. It's no way related to like self-harm, like depression, that type of thing, but it's more like an urge, if you will. but still keep that in mind. This book definitely felt like a filler novel, like we were leading up to something. I can't really go into like too much detail, but while I do enjoy listening to them and I think they're really fun, the world is really interesting, I do think that the author could cut down on things and streamline the story more, because these audiobooks can get pretty lengthy for like urban fantasy series. I don't know how it is, because when I checked Goodreads it said like about 400 pages, but these audiobooks feel very like long. Our main character Meg is also, for me, becoming a little bit more like insufferable. She has a reason why she behaves the way she does because of her upbringing. She was essentially like held captive for most of her life because of her talents, but sometimes I really want her to get chastised for the decisions that she makes that affect the others, and she finally does kind of get some talking to, which I really appreciated. I feel like that's not something I see a lot in books. Like, main characters get away with so much that sometimes I kind of just want some sort of figure to like sit them down and be like, hey, you need to stop fucking around because it's getting all of us into trouble, that kind of thing. So it was really like cathartic to get that here. But yeah, I can't really go into too much detail about the plot because third book in, some things are starting to form. But if you're looking for urban fantasy but with something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more like world building put into it, as opposed to just like we live in New York City and there's vampires or something, there's some interesting things brewing here, some interesting like concepts that I don't typically see in urban fantasy in this series by Anne Bishop. So I still want to continue, but I just don't want them to be bland like this one was. So we also have another paranormal urban fantasy series. I also have Changeless by Gail Carriger. This is also set during the like Victorian era. I think Queen Victoria is also kind of like a minor character in the series. This series takes place in a world where the supernatural creatures, specifically vampires, werewolves, and ghosts, are like common knowledge. It's not like a secret or anything. What's interesting about this world is that the people who get turned into werewolves, vampires, or when they die they become ghosts, the author's reasoning is that they have an excess of soul. So typically like creatives, like actors, artists, will can get turned into these creatures where other humans cannot, because they don't have an excess of soul. Our main character Alexia, she is what you call a preternatural, I think that's the word they use for her, and she has no soul whatsoever. So her like special talent is that when she comes into physical contact with a werewolf and a vampire, she can turn them back into human form so long as she's like in physical contact with them. If she were to find the body of a person who has turned into a ghost, she could actually exorcise them. And all this because she has no soul. So typically with each like urban fantasy series, there is an isolated individual plot within each book, and then there's like an overall arching story. So the catalyst in this particular book that gets the story rolling is that in the middle of London, a few like square blocks, I would say, all the like supernatural creatures get reverted back to human form for some time. Vampires turn into humans, werewolves change back into their human form, and all the ghosts within this area are exorcised. And our main character Alexia, who has some connections to the Queen, gets called in to help investigate and like lend her knowledge, since this is something that she can do on an individual scale, but since this is a large scale event, you know, she's called to investigate and see like what's what. This was a series that I was really like anticipating and like eager to get to, since it has things that I think I would really enjoy. So the setting, it's urban fantasy, the characters are all really like interesting. I think the author's writing is too like casual and like witty, that when we get to the actual like plot and like the climax and all that kind of stuff, like I'm never really like super emotionally invested. I'm kind of just like chilling, like it's like, oh, the story's progressing, like let's keep it moving. The strongest part of this book and the last book, the first book in the series, that I remember is like not necessarily the plot. What I'm more focused and like intrigued by, and like the better parts of these books have been like just like character interactions, like the moments between Alexia and her husband. In this book, Alexia meets a French woman who's like really interesting to her, and their interactions were really interesting. And like the funny thing is that like these moments that I really enjoy, you could take them out of the book and they'd still be fine. Like they don't need context. You know how sometimes authors send out monthly like newsletters where they update their audience on like what they're currently working on, any projects that are coming out, what they're currently reading, that kind of stuff. Sometimes some authors write little like excerpts from their books, they're not really like super like plot wise relevant to the stories, but they're like little tidbits that the audience, their fans, can read. A lot of the parts that I like in this book like could have just been like added in like a newsletter. I don't know what that says about like the author's writing plot wise. Basically what I'm trying to say is that there were moments within the story where I was like so bored to tears and it was like a struggle to get through, but then when there was like a moment that I was really enjoying, you know, you read through it and it's like really fun, and then you hit another like stall or lull in the book, which is really unfortunate because again, like I said, this is a series that I really wanted to enjoy. So I don't know if I'll continue. I could. There's only 2 more in this series, I believe, but yeah. And the last book I want to talk about was a recommendation I got from TikTok, which isn't the best place to get recommendations. I read Court of Dragons by Frost K. I gave this like a 2.5 star, the lowest rating this month. I believe this is going to be a duology. In this book, we follow our main character who is going to get married. Like at the very beginning of the book, she has a fiance, she's going to get married, but then her islands are invaded by, I believe is it Fae or elves? The elves that live on the mainland. Our main character's islands are known for having like dragons and like having strong connections to dragons. Also, they're an island in the middle of like a hot like trading zone, so like there's like commercial reasons why they're also invaded, and a lot of stuff goes down. There's a lot of like character death stuff that happens pretty early on, and this is definitely like enemies to lovers romance centric. Out of all the books in this wrap up, I could 100% see why someone would DNF this early on. In enemies to lovers, I know that characters don't have to be redeemed, especially if they're enemies, but like personally for me, the enemy who's supposed to turn lover, I don't think he's redeemed enough, or I could not look at this character as a possible lover later on, knowing what he did to me. I feel like for a lot of readers, he crossed some lines that no amount of redemption could ever come back. I know enemies to lovers is fairly popular, but I don't think that this is a love interest that people would want to root for. This might work better if it was a longer series and it was more slow burn and the author really delved deep into the feelings of these characters, but a lot of this was very surface level to me. And again, I think it's going to be a duology. It was a fairly quick read too, so it's not like the author's really like, you know, diving deep for a lot of the more emotionally tense moments. The best part were the last few chapters leading up into book 2. Also, the book's called like Court of Dragons, and it could have used like way more dragons. If I was to make a video that was like books that deserve DNFs, this would be on it, like no questions asked. I totally understand why people didn't like this. For some reason, people also really like it. You know, read what you want, but this was like not it at all. So yeah, those are all the books that I read during the month of January. I'm sorry if I seem kind of like low energy or like not into it. The best books and like the most fun books that I read this month I already like talked about in a vlog, so I was kind of like dreading doing this particular wrap up. But yeah, feel free to like talk to me in the comments about like anything I talked about. I'd like to hear anything you have to say down below. I'll try to remember to link that vlog down below. I will list all the books that I've read. Feel free to like, dislike, comment, or subscribe. It's all cool with me. I will link my socials down below as well as some far more important links. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.